The howling winter wind cut through the New Mexico wilderness, rattling the lone cabin perched on the hillside. Inside, Mason Caldwell thrashed in his sleep, trapped in a nightmare that had haunted him for 10 long years. "No, hold your fire!" His own voice echoed in the dream, lost in the chaos of gunshots, screams, and thick smoke. In the nightmare, he was back at Raven Ridge. Apache women ran with children clutched to their chests. Elders stumbled from burning lodges. Through the haze of gunsmoke, Mason saw her again, a young Apache girl, no more than 20, running directly into the line of fire of his squadron. He raised his rifle, aimed low, and fired. The girl fell, clutching her shoulder. Their gazes locked for a heartbeat before the smoke swallowed her. Mason jolted awake with a strangled cry, hand instinctively reaching for the Winchester propped against his bedside. Cold sweat plastered his shirt to his chest. The dying embers in the fireplace cast ghostly shadows across the sparse furnishings. A table with 2 chairs, shelves with provisions, and the single bed where he now sat, shivering not from cold, but from memories. Mason Caldwell had once been Captain Caldwell, a respected Union Army officer and frontier scout. Now, at 47, he was a hollow-eyed recluse with a permanent limp from an old battle wound and deeper scars that no one could see. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, grimacing at the familiar pain that shot through his left thigh, a Confederate bullet from Shiloh. The clock read 4:18 a.m. Too early to start the day, too late to hope for peaceful sleep. With practiced movements, Mason rekindled the fire, then retrieved a bottle of whiskey from a cupboard. He downed it in one swallow, welcoming the burn that momentarily chased away the chill of the nightmare. Next came the ritual he performed every night after the dreams. He took his Winchester, dismantled it piece by piece, and meticulously cleaned each part. The familiar routine anchored him to reality, gave his trembling hands purpose. His eyes occasionally drifted to the small silver frame on the mantelpiece, the only ornament in the otherwise austere cabin. Elizabeth smiled back at him, forever young, her hand resting on the shoulder of their daughter, Sarah. They had died of fever while he was away. By the time the message reached him, they were already in the ground. Mason had built this cabin with his own hands after resigning his commission. Here, nestled in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, he found a measure of peace and solitude. The nearest settlement was a half-day's ride away. As dawn broke, Mason donned his worn coat and stepped outside to check his traps. The bitter cold stung his face, but he welcomed the discomfort. Physical pain was preferable to the phantom wounds of memory. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he made his rounds, finding a rabbit in one trap. On his return to the cabin, he noticed fresh tracks in the snow near his woodpile, too large for any forest creature. Someone had been watching his cabin. Mason skinned and cleaned the rabbit with practiced efficiency. As the pot simmered over the fire, he unfolded the letter that had been slipped under his door 3 days ago by a courier from Santa Fe. The official seal of the Santa Fe Town Council adorned the top of the page. The carefully worded proposal offered $800 for his property, a generous sum for the railroad's new northern line. The thinly veiled thread at the end mentioned regrettable alternative methods of acquisition. Attached was a map marking his cabin and the surrounding area. What caught his attention was the boundary line. It extended far beyond what would be needed for railroad tracks, encompassing a section of hills to the north that held significance only to the Apache and Navajo, who considered them sacred ground. After finishing his meal, Mason decided a hunting trip was in order, partly to replenish his dwindling meat supply, partly to investigate the strange tracks. He loaded his Winchester, checked his Colt revolver, and packed basic provisions. The forest told a story he didn't like. Besides the tracks near his cabin, he found other signs of human presence. A cigar butt half buried in snow, bark scraped from a tree where a horse had been tied, a scrap of cloth caught on a branch. Someone was watching his property. By midday, Mason had climbed to a ridge that overlooked a small valley. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a raven or the soft whisper of wind through the branches. Then he heard it, an unusual pattern of bird calls, too rhythmic to be natural. Mason recognized it immediately as a signal used by Apache scouts. Drawing his rifle, he crouched low and moved toward the sound. As he neared the edge of a small clearing, he stopped abruptly, stunned by the sight before him. In the center of the clearing, drawn in the virgin snow, was a perfect circle approximately 12 feet in diameter. Around its edge, something dark stained the white surface. Fresh blood. Inside the circle were symbols Mason recognized as Apache, signs for protection, for spirits, for passage to the next world. At the very center lay what appeared to be a bundle of cloth, half covered by fresh snow. But it wasn't cloth. It was a woman. Mason approached cautiously. The woman was Apache, dressed in a buckskin dress now torn and bloodied. Her dark hair spread across the white ground like spilled ink. Around her wrists were raw marks where ropes had cut into flesh, and dried blood caked the side of her face. As Mason knelt beside her and checked for a pulse, her eyes flew open, dark, fierce, and filled with equal measures of fear and defiance. They locked on Mason and held there. She didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't try to move. She simply stared at him as if daring him to finish what others had started. In that look, Mason felt a jolt of recognition, not of her face, but of that expression. He had seen it in the mirror every day since Raven Ridge. His gaze shifted to her shoulder, where the buckskin had torn away. There, inked into her copper skin, was a tattoo he recognized immediately, an eagle with a rattlesnake clutched in its talons. It was the symbol of a particular Apache band, one that was supposed to have been completely wiped out at Raven Ridge. Old instincts tightened every muscle in Mason's body. He had fought against Apache raiders, had lost friends to sudden attacks. For a moment, it was that memory that moved his hands toward his rifle. The woman's eyes followed his movement, unblinking. Then her cracked lips parted, and she whispered in Apache, "Akaitsa Dine. The blue-eyed dark ones are coming." Mason froze. Akaitsa Dine was what the Apache called certain white men they considered especially dangerous. Men with blue eyes who brought death. He knew only one such man personally, Colonel Richard Blackwood. The woman's eyes began to close, her strength fading. Mason made his decision. He slid his arms beneath her, careful to avoid her obvious injuries, and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, her body tense but too weak to resist. Mason rose to his feet with her weight steady in his grip and turned back toward the trail home. Every step carried the weight of his choice. He thought of how she might see him. Just another enemy, another white man who could hurt her. He thought of what it meant to bring an Apache woman into his cabin when tensions in the territory were already high. Still he walked. The frost crunched under his boots, the trees closed around him, and a raven called in the distance. Mason Caldwell carried her out of the clearing, not knowing yet what it would cost him, only knowing he could not leave her to die in the snow. By the time Mason reached his cabin, the sun had pushed higher. He shouldered open the door and carried her to his bed, laying her down as gently as possible. She remained conscious, her dark eyes tracking his movements with wary attention. Mason built up the fire, then gathered clean cloth, a basin of water, and the small tin of salve he kept for wounds. When he approached the bed, the woman tensed visibly. "I'm going to clean your wounds," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I won't hurt you." She watched him silently, neither consenting nor refusing. Mason began with the cut on her forehead, gently washing away the dried blood. "Do you speak English?" he asked. After a long pause, she responded, her voice barely audible. "Yes. What's your name?" Another pause, longer this time, as if she was weighing the risk. "Najoni," she finally said. "But my true name, Naylin." Mason nodded, understanding the significance of her offering both names. Najoni was Navajo for beautiful, a name she might use among whites or other tribes. Nalinian would be her Apache name, meaning warrior, a name shared only with those she trusted. "I'm Mason, Mason Caldwell." When he needed to check the injury on her shoulder, he hesitated. "I need to see your shoulder wound." Nellen gave a slight nod, wincing as she shifted. Mason carefully peeled back the torn buckskin, revealing a deep gash that looked like it had been made by a knife. As he cleaned it, he noticed something that made his breath catch. A round, puckered scar just below the fresh wound. A bullet scar, old and well-healed. His hand froze. The placement of that scar matched exactly where he had shot the young Apache woman in his recurring nightmare. The angle, the chiramam, it was as if his memory had been branded onto her flesh. Unbidden images from Raven Ridge flooded his mind. The case, the smoke, the moment he'd made the choice to shoot the fleeing woman to prevent her from running into the main firing line. His hands began to tremble. Nolan's eyes narrowed, watching the change in him. "You were there," she said suddenly. "Raven Ridge." It wasn't a question. Mason couldn't meet her gaze. "Yes, you shot me." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Mason finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I did." What he expected, hatred, accusation, fury, didn't come. Instead, Nayland studied him with an unsettling calm. "You aimed low," she said finally. "Others aim to kill." Before Mason could respond, a spasm of pain crossed her face. She closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. He finished bandaging her shoulder in silence, his mind churning with the implications of her words. He offered her water and a small portion of rabbit stew. As she ate, he noticed how her hands trembled with exhaustion, yet she maintained a dignity that spoke of inner strength. "Who did this to you?" he asked when she had finished eating. "Blackwood's men," she replied. "They searched for map to Silver River." "Silver River? What's that?" Nolan's expression closed. "Sacred place. Apache secret." Mason wanted to press for more information, but he could see she was fading fast. "Rest," he said, rising from the bedside. "We'll talk more later." As he turned to go, her hands shot out, grabbing his wrist. "They will come," she said, her dark eyes boring into his. "For me. For Map." "Blackwood?" She nodded once, then released his wrist, her hand falling back to the bed as exhaustion claimed her. Mason checked his Winchester, making sure it was loaded, and positioned a chair near the window where he could watch the approach to the cabin. If Blackwood was indeed coming, Mason would be ready. 3 days passed. Nayland's strength returned gradually. The cabin, usually silent but for the crackle of the fire, now held the presence of another breathing soul. Mason found the change both unsettling and oddly comforting. On the 4th day, as a pale winter sun climbed into a cloudless sky, Mason noticed smoke rising from the direction of the trail that led to his cabin. He was outside chopping wood at the time and immediately dropped the axe, hurrying inside. "Someone's coming," he told Nayland, who was seated at the table repairing the torn seam of her dress. "Several riders from the East Trail." She set aside her work, her face betraying no surprise. "Blackwood." Mason grabbed his rifle and moved to the window that offered the best view of the approaching riders. Through the glass, he saw 5 men on horseback. In the lead rode a figure Mason would have recognized anywhere, tall and straight-backed despite his age, with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a black coat over a fine suit and a wide-brimmed black hat. Colonel Richard Blackwood. His ice-blue eyes had earned him his Apache nickname and a reputation for cold-blooded efficiency in pacifying native populations. Mason positioned himself on the porch, rifle held ready, as the riders approached. Blackwood reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin, raising a gloved hand to halt his men. "Captain Caldwell," he called, his voice carrying the cultured accent of an East Coast education. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough, Colonel," Mason replied evenly. "And it's not Captain anymore. I resigned, remember?" "Ah, yes. After that unfortunate business at Raven Ridge." Blackwood dismounted with the fluid grace of a much younger man. "May I approach? It's bitter cold for a reunion." Mason didn't lower his rifle. "State your business, Blackwood. This isn't a social call." "Direct as always, I'm looking for an Apache woman, a thief who stole something of significant value. My men tracked her to this area." His blue eyes studied Mason's face. "Have you seen her?" "I haven't seen any Apache in these parts for months." "No?" Blackwood took another step forward. "That's strange, because my tracker found footprints leading from a ceremonial circle directly to your cabin. One set large, a man's boot prints, the other smaller, a woman's moccasin prints." Mason's grip tightened on his rifle. "You're trespassing on my property, Colonel. I suggest you turn around." Blackwood chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Your property? According to the letter you received, this land will soon belong to the Western Union Railroad." "I declined their offer," Mason said coldly. "This is still my land." "For now," Blackwood conceded. "But the railroad always gets what it wants in the end." One of Blackwood's men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Mason didn't miss the motion. "I know she's here, Mason," the colonel continued. "The Apache thief. Hand her over, and I'll ensure the railroad's offer is doubled. A tidy sum that would set you up comfortably anywhere else. And if she's not here, then you won't mind if my men search your cabin." Mason was about to respond when the cabin door opened behind him. Nolan stepped out, her face impassive, her posture straight despite her injuries. "I am here," she said, her voice steady. "No need to search." Blackwood's eyes lit up with satisfaction. "Ah, there you are, my dear. You've led us on quite a chase." He turned to Mason, his voice hardening. "Step aside, Caldwell. This woman is a thief and a murderer. She killed 2 of my men while escaping custody." Mason didn't move. "What did she steal that's so valuable you'd track her through a snowstorm?" "That's none of your concern." "It is my concern, since you're on my property, threatening a guest under my protection." Blackwood's facade of civility slipped. "Your guest possesses information vital to national interests. She knows the location of a resource that could change the course of this nation's future." "The Silver River is not yours to take," Nayland said from behind Mason. "Ah, so she's told you about it." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Did she also tell you who she really is? The last surviving member of a band of Apache that raided settlements all along the territory border?" "Enough," Mason cut in. "Whatever grievances you have with her, they'll be settled legally." Blackwood laughed outright. "Legal channels? Coming from the man who disappeared into the wilderness rather than face a military inquiry?" His expression hardened. "I'm not just representing the railroad, Caldwell. I answer to higher authorities." "What authorities?" "The highest in the land," Blackwood said proudly. "Senator Vernon Hayes personally tasked me with securing the Silver River site. He chairs the Committee on Mining and has the president's ear on matters of national resource security." There it was, the first twist in this tangled situation. This wasn't just about a railroad or silver. This was political, reaching all the way to Washington. So the railroad, the offer for my land, the interest in these hills, it's all about this Silver River. "The railroad needs the right-of-way, certainly," Blackwood confirmed. "But yes, Senator Hayes has a particular interest in what lies beneath these hills. And your Apache friend is going to lead us to it, one way or another." Blackwood's men dismounted, spreading out to flank the cabin. Their hands rested on their weapons, faces grim with purpose. "Last chance, Caldwell," Blackwood said, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Step aside and hand over the woman, or my men will take her by force, and you'll be buried in an unmarked grave." Mason felt Nayland move closer behind him, her hand lightly touching his back, not seeking protection, but offering silent support. "No," he said simply. What happened next unfolded in a blur of violence. Blackwood drew his pistol with surprising speed. Mason fired first, his shot going wide as he dove for cover behind a stack of firewood. Nayland disappeared back into the cabin as bullets splintered the doorframe. 2 of Blackwood's men rushed the porch while the others provided covering fire. Mason dropped one with a shot to the chest, but the second reached the cabin, kicking in the door. From inside came the sound of a struggle, followed by Nolan's defiant shout. Mason broke cover, racing for the door, despite the bullets kicking up snow around him. A sharp pain tore through his upper arm, a graze. He reached the doorway to find Nolan grappling with Blackwood's man, a knife in her hand. As Mason watched, she drove it into her attacker's thigh. "Behind you," Nolan shouted. Mason spun to see Blackwood himself mounting the porch steps, pistol raised. Mason fired instinctively, his shot catching Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning the older man around. But Blackwood stayed on his feet, bringing his gun back up with a grimace of pain. Time seemed to slow. Mason knew he wouldn't be able to fire again before Blackwood got his shot off. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Nolan throw the knife. It struck Blackwood's hand, causing his shot to go wild. The bullet hit the oil lamp hanging near the door. Glass shattered, kerosene spilled, and ignited instantly. Flames leaped up the side of the cabin, creating a wall of fire and smoke. In the chaos, Blackwood grabbed Nayland, dragging her out onto the porch with his pistol pressed to her head. Blood soaked his coat where Mason's bullet had struck him, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "Drop the gun, Caldwell," Blackwood shouted, "or I'll put a bullet in her brain." Mason froze, his rifle half raised. Nayland's eyes met his, wide but determined. "Let her go, Blackwood," Mason said, his voice deadly calm. This isn't about her. It's between you and me now. Oh, but it is about her, Blackwood replied, his smile cold. About her and her people's so-called sacred places and the silver that's buried there. Silver that's going to make Senator Hayes a very powerful man once it's secured. The fire was spreading rapidly. Mason could hear Blackwood's remaining men circling around, trying to flank him. There's no need for more bloodshed, Mason tried. The time for talking ended at Raven Ridge, Blackwood spat, when you chose these savages over your duty, when you walked away rather than finishing the job. The job. Mason felt a surge of anger. You mean the massacre of peaceful villagers based on falsified intelligence? That job? Blackwood's face darkened. Careful, Caldwell. That kind of talk could be considered treasonous. It's not treason to tell the truth. The truth, Blackwood sneered, is whatever those in power say it is. He pressed the gun harder against Nilene's temple. Now, drop your weapon. Before Mason could decide, Nalin moved. In a swift motion, she drove her elbow back into Blackwood's wounded shoulder, twisting away from the gun. The pistol discharged, the bullet going wide as Blackwood staggered back. Mason raised his rifle, but Nalin was still too close to Blackwood for a clear shot. She was struggling with the colonel, fighting with a ferocity born of years of hatred. "Run!" Mason shouted to her. "Get clear!" She tried to break away, but Blackwood caught her by the hair, yanking her back. His face was contorted with rage as he raised his pistol again. Mason didn't hesitate. He fired. Blackwood jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as the bullet found its mark. He released Nalin, staggered 2 steps, and collapsed into the snow. For a moment, everything was still, except for the crackling of the fire consuming the cabin. Then Nalin moved, scrambling away from Blackwood's motionless form. Mason approached cautiously, his rifle still trained on the colonel, but there was no need. Richard Blackwood stared sightlessly at the winter sky, a bloom of red staining the snow beneath him. "Are you hurt?" Mason asked Nalin. "No," she said, her voice shaky. "You?" "Just a graze." Relief washed over him at the sight of her standing alive despite everything. Behind them, the cabin was fully engulfed in flames. The remaining 2 of Blackwood's men had fled on horseback, undoubtedly to bring reinforcements. "We need to go," Mason said. "They'll be back with more men." They quickly searched Blackwood's saddlebags, finding ammunition, dried food, a map, and a small leather journal. Mason tucked these into his own pack, along with his canteen and the few possessions he'd managed to grab, including the photograph of his family. Nalin retrieved something from inside her dress, a small piece of hide, folded and wrapped in cloth. "The map?" Mason asked. She nodded. "One piece. Blackwood wanted all pieces." "How many pieces are there?" "4, she said. "I have one. You have one." Mason blinked in surprise. "I do?" Nalin's eyes were steady on his. "You took from Blackwood's tent, after Raven Ridge." Mason remembered then, the oilskin packet he'd taken the night after the massacre, hoping it contained evidence. It had been hidden under a floorboard in his now burning cabin. "It was in the cabin," he said, his heart sinking. "Under the floor. It's gone now." But Nalin shook her head, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She reached into her dress again and pulled out a small oilskin packet, his oilskin packet. "I found when searching for weapon," she explained. "Felt same as mine." Despite everything, the danger, the loss of his home, the uncertainty ahead, Mason found himself laughing, a short, rusty sound, but genuine. "We need to leave this place," he said, sobering quickly. "Where will we go?" Nalin asked. Mason considered their options. "North, to the Navajo settlement near Blue Creek. I know their head man, Ashki Dighin. He might help us." They took Blackwood's horse and the mount of the man Nalin had stabbed. As they rode away from the burning cabin, Mason looked back once. The home he had built with his own hands was engulfed in flames, Blackwood's body a dark shape in the snow beside it. It was the end of one chapter of his life. What would come next, he didn't know. But as he felt Nalin's presence beside him, solid and real, he realized he wasn't facing it alone anymore. The storm caught them halfway to the Navajo settlement, sweeping down with unexpected ferocity. Mason led them into a narrow ravine, finding a shallow cave carved into the rock face, just enough to shield them from the driving snow. Starting a flame tested even Mason's wilderness skills until Nalan gently took the flint and steel. From a small pouch at her waist, she produced what looked like dried moss mixed with resin. This caught a spark instantly, allowing them to build a small but steady fire. As night fell, they huddled close to the flames, wrapped in blankets, salvaged from Blackwood's saddlebags. "How far to Navajo?" Nalan asked, her voice nearly lost in the storm's howl. "Normally a day's ride," Mason replied. "In this weather, could be 2 or 3. She nodded, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight. Despite her exhaustion, she insisted on checking Mason's wounded arm, cleaning it with melted snow and rebinding it with a strip torn from one of the blankets. "You've done this before," Mason observed. A shadow crossed her face. "Many times. After Raven Ridge, many wounded needed care." The mention of Raven Ridge hung between them like an unsprung trap. "Why did you help me against Blackwood?" Mason asked finally. "After what I did, what my people did to yours?" Nalan was quiet for a moment. Then she met his gaze directly. "You shot me," she said simply, "but aimed to wound, not kill. I saw your eyes that day. Not killer's eyes. Saw you try to stop others. Heard you shout to hold fire." Mason swallowed hard. "I failed. I couldn't stop it. Couldn't save your people." "One man cannot stop river," she replied, "can only try to pull few from water." Her words offered no absolution but contained a truth Mason had been unable to face for 10 years. As if sensing the weight of his thoughts, Nalan changed the subject. "You should sleep now. Need strength for journey." Mason woke to Nalan's hand on his shoulder. Her face was taut with concern. "Fever," she said, touching his forehead. "Wound infected." The bullet graze that had seemed minor now burned like fire, and he could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. Nalan helped him drink, then unwrapped his arm. The wound was angry and inflamed, the skin around it swollen and hot to the touch. Without proper treatment, such infections could be deadly. "I have medicine," Nalan said, reaching for her small pouch. "But need more herbs. Stay." Before Mason could protest, she had slipped out into the storm. Left alone, Mason drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams haunted by images of Raven Ridge. When Nalan returned, her hair and clothes covered in snow, she found him muttering deliriously. She worked quickly, grinding herbs she had somehow found beneath the snow, mixing them with fat from their meager provisions to create a poultice. As she applied it to his wound, she began to sing softly, a melody unlike anything Mason had heard before, rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. Through his fever haze, Mason watched her work, her voice weaving a spell of healing around him. She was speaking to someone in Apache, not to him, but to ancestors or spirits. When the poultice was secured, Nalan pressed a bitter tea to his lips. "Drink," she commanded. "Will help fever." Mason complied, grimacing at the taste. Nalan settled beside him, her presence a bulwark against both the physical cold and the chill of his dark thoughts. "Sleep now," she said. "I watch." He woke hours later to find the storm had passed and his fever broken. Nalan sat at the cave entrance, alert and watchful. "Fever gone," she said with satisfaction. "Medicine worked." "Thank you," Mason said, his voice rough. "What did you sing last night when you were treating my wound?" "Song of the Eagle," she said quietly. "Story of great bird who carries souls of dead to spirit world." She gestured to the tattoo on her shoulder. "Eagle with snake, symbol of my band. Eagle who carries, snake who guards." "Your people, they were the Eagle clan?" She nodded, her face solemn. "Last of Eagle clan now, only me." The weight of her words settled over them both, the terrible solitude of being the sole survivor of a people, a culture, a way of life. "I'm sorry," Mason said, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as he spoke them. "You lost family too," she said. "Saw picture you saved from burning." "My wife, Elizabeth. Our daughter, Sarah. Fever took them while I was away." "No chance to say goodbye," Nalan observed. "Same for me. Was hunting when soldiers came." For a long moment, they sat in silence, bound by the common thread of grief that ran through their lives. They prepared to leave, Mason still weakened by fever, but determined to continue. By midday, they had made good progress despite the difficult conditions. "Tell me about the Silver River," Mason said as they rested the horses. What makes it so valuable Blackwood would kill for it? Nullen reached into her dress and withdrew the folded piece of hide with its strange markings. This map piece, she said, unfolding it carefully, shows path to Silver River, place where Earth's blood flows. Mason studied the markings, lines, spirals, and symbols that meant nothing to him. Earth's blood? What my people call silver, she explained. Blood of Mother Earth. Very powerful, very dangerous if not respected. Her finger traced a particular symbol, a circle with radiating lines like a sun. Silver River is where pure silver flows like water, in caves beneath sacred mountains. In Blackwood, or rather this Senator Hayes wants to mine it, not just silver for coins or jewelry, special silver, has power, healing power, other powers too. Mason raised an eyebrow skeptically, but something in her earnest expression gave him pause. That's why your people kept it secret? Because of these powers? She nodded. Map made in pieces long ago, so no one person could find river without permission of many bands. My grandfather was keeper of ceremonies, taught me some ways. Blackwood thought I knew all secrets. Mason thought about the oilskin packet they had salvaged. And the piece I took from Blackwood's tent after Raven Ridge? How does it fit with yours? Nolan laid both pieces side by side. The markings continued from one to the other, forming a larger pattern, though still obviously incomplete. Shows different parts of journey, she explained. Your piece shows mountains, entry to canyon. My piece shows path through canyon to cave entrance. And the other two pieces? One with Navajo elder for safekeeping. Last piece, not sure. Maybe with Blackwood's men, maybe sent to Hayes. The sun was beginning to set when they crested a ridge and saw in the valley below the smoke from multiple fires rising in the still evening air. The Navajo settlement. We'll approach carefully, Mason said. The Navajo and Apache haven't always been friends. Nalen's face was solemn. No choice now. Need their help. Need third map piece. Together they urged their tired horses down the ridge toward whatever welcome or danger awaited them below. The Navajo settlement spread across the valley floor like scattered beads, hogans of various sizes clustered in family groups. As they approached, they were met by two young riders who emerged from the trees, rifles held ready but not aimed. "Ya'ate," Mason called, using one of the few Navajo words he knew, a general greeting. The riders studied them with wary eyes. One said something to the other in Navajo, gesturing toward Naleen with obvious suspicion. "Ashki Dighin," Mason said clearly. "I seek Ashki Dighin. Tell him Mason Caldwell has come." One rider returned to the settlement while the other remained, keeping watch. They waited in tense silence until the messenger returned, accompanied by an older man on a paint pony. Ashki Dighin had aged since Mason last saw him, but he sat straight in the saddle and his eyes were sharp as they took in the visitors. "Mason Caldwell," he said, his voice gravelly but strong. "Many winters since you rode with scouts." "Too many, Ashki Dighin," Mason replied respectfully. "Thank you for seeing us." The old man's gaze shifted to Naleen. "Apache woman, far from her people's lands." "Her name is Naleen," Mason said. "She has no people left. Raven Ridge." Understanding flickered in the old man's eyes. The Navajo had heard of the massacre. It was a name that carried weight. "Come," Ashki Dighin said after a moment. "Share our fire tonight. Tomorrow we talk of why Army Scout and Apache woman ride together in winter with fresh bullet wounds and the smell of death on their clothes." They followed the head man into the settlement. An older woman emerged from the main hogan, Ashki Dighin's wife, Nitsa Hakis. She took one look at them and began issuing orders to the others. Soon food was being prepared, blankets brought out, and their horses led away to be cared for. "Sit," Ashki Dighin said, gesturing to the fire. "Eat, rest. Tomorrow is for talking." After the meal, Nitsa Hakis showed them to a small guest hogan where they could sleep. "Thank you," Mason said as she turned to leave. "For your hospitality." Nitsa Hakis paused. "You bring trouble to our door," she observed. "Not unkindly, but my husband says you are a man of honor. We will see." Mason sank onto one of the bedrolls, the events of the past days catching up to him. Across the small space, Naleen sat cross-legged, staring into the small fire that had been prepared for them. "Will they help us?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Mason admitted. "Ashki Dighin is fair-minded, but he has his people to think of. If helping us puts them at risk, Nullin nodded, understanding. We ask for supplies only, not stay. Yes, Mason agreed. And information if they have it. Mason woke sometime in the night to the sound of soft singing. Opening his eyes, he saw Nayland seated by the fire which had burned down to glowing embers. She was singing the song of the eagle, her voice barely above a whisper. In the dim light, with her guard lowered, she looked vulnerable in a way she never allowed during daylight. The song spoke of flight, of freedom, of release from earthly bonds. Though Mason couldn't understand the Apache words, the meaning seemed to transcend language. He remained still, not wanting to interrupt this private moment. There was something sacred in it, a connection to a past and a people that lived on only in her memory. The song stayed with him as he drifted back to sleep, its melody intertwining with his dreams, replacing the usual nightmares with images of open skies and soaring freedom. Morning brought the smell of cooking and the soft murmur of voices outside. Ashki Dighin awaited them by the central fire, where a pot of something fragrant bubbled. He gestured for them to sit and join him for the morning meal, a porridge of corn and dried berries. Now, the old man said when they had eaten, you will tell me why you come to Dene lands, why soldiers search for you, and what brings Apache and white man together as allies. Mason glanced at Nolan, who nodded slightly. He told their story from the beginning, finding Nolan in the ceremonial circle, Blackwood's arrival, their flight and the discovery of their connected past at Raven Ridge. He explained about the map pieces and the Silver River, about Senator Hayes and his interest in the sacred site. Ashki Dighin listened without interruption, his weathered face giving nothing away. Only when Mason mentioned the map pieces did a flicker of recognition cross his features. These map pieces, the old man said when Mason had finished. May I see them? Nalin hesitated only briefly before retrieving the hide pieces from inside her dress. She laid them side by side before Ashki Dighin, who studied them with evident interest. I have seen such markings before, he said, on a piece of hide given to my grandfather by an Apache medicine man many winters ago, for safekeeping. Mason and Nalin exchanged a glance of surprise and hope. You have the third piece? Mason asked. I do, Ashki Dighin confirmed. But before I show it, I must know your purpose. What do you seek at the Silver River? Nalin answered, her voice steady and clear. To protect sacred place from those who would destroy it. To stop Hayes and men like Blackwood from taking what is not theirs. And you, Mason Caldwell? What is your purpose in this quest? Mason considered carefully. At first, it was simple survival. Blackwood left us no choice but to run. Now it's about making right what I couldn't stop at Raven Ridge. About standing on the right side this time. Ashki Dighin nodded slowly. The Silver River is known to my people as well. Not our sacred place, but we respect its power. The old ones say it is not like other silver. It is untouched. Blessed by Creator. Have you seen it? Mason asked. No, few living eyes have seen it. But, the old man's voice softened, its waters saved my son's life. This was unexpected. Mason leaned forward. How? Many years ago, my son was wounded in a fight with raiders. The wound became poison in his blood, what you call infection. Nothing we tried would heal him. He was dying. Ashki Diggin's eyes grew distant with memory. An old Apache medicine woman came to our camp. She had a small vial of water, silver bright. She gave it to my son to drink and bathed his wound with it. By morning, the poison was gone. In 3 days, he was strong again. Water from Silver River, Nolan said softly, has great medicine. Yes, the headman agreed. This is why the map was made in pieces long ago, so no one person could find the river without permission of many bands. This is why it must be protected. He rose and went into his hogan, returning moments later with a small wooden box intricately carved with tribal designs. From it, he carefully removed a piece of hide similar to the two they already possessed. When placed together with the others, it formed a larger section of the map, though still incomplete. Even Mason could see how the symbols connected across the pieces, forming a pathway through mountain terrain. These show the way, Ashki Dighin said, his finger tracing the connected symbols. But the fourth piece, the one you say Blackwood or Hayes may have, it shows how to pass the guardians at the cave entrance. Without it, none can enter safely. Guardians? Mason asked. Spirit protectors, Nayland explained. Ancient ones who watch over Silver River. Test those who seek to enter. Need right words, right offerings, or they bring death. So without the fourth piece, we can find the river but not access it, Mason summarized. Perhaps, Ashkey Diggins said, looking at Nalin. Unless one knows the old ways. Your grandfather was keeper of ceremonies, yes? Nalin nodded. He taught me some ways before Raven Ridge. Not all, but some. It might be enough, the old man mused. Or it might not. The risk is great. Greater risk to let Hayes find river first, Nayland said firmly. Must trio. Ashkey Diggins studied her, then nodded. You have courage, daughter of Eagle Clan. He turned to Mason. And you, Mason Caldwell, have found a worthy path to redeem your past. He gathered the map pieces and returned them to Nayland. I will help you, not just with my piece of the map, but with guidance to find the fourth. You know where it is? Mason asked, surprised. I know who might have it, or knowledge of it, the headman replied. A trader called Samuel Hollister, who keeps a store near Fort Stanton. He collects old things of native people. Some say stolen, some say bought, but he has them. Mason knew of Hollister by reputation, an Irish immigrant who had established a trading post that catered to both settlers and natives, known for his fair dealings. Fort Stanton, he said slowly. That's 3 days' ride south, in the opposite direction from where Blackwood's men would expect us to flee. Or lead you into a trap, Ashkey Diggins cautioned. The fort will have heard of Blackwood's death by now. Soldiers will be watching roads, settlements. We'll be careful, Mason assured him. Rest here today, regain your strength. Tomorrow I will give you fresh horses, supplies, and a letter for Hollister. He respects the DNA. My words may help him trust you. As Ashkey Diggins rose to leave, Mason asked one final question. What do you know of Senator Hayes? Why would a man from Washington be so interested in the Silver River? The headman's expression darkened. Hayes is a man who worships two gods, power and money. If the Silver River is as powerful as old stories say, such a man would kill many to possess it. With those sobering words, he left them to rest and prepare for the journey ahead. That evening, Ashkey Diggins' people gathered around the central fire for a ceremony honoring their guests. Mason sat beside Nalin, watching as dancers moved in rhythmic patterns that told ancient stories of creation and survival. Despite the language barrier, the power of their movements conveyed meaning that transcended words. As the ceremony concluded, Nitsahakis approached Nalin with a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. For journey, she said in halting English. Medicine, food. Strong woman needs strong help. Nalin accepted the gift with quiet dignity. Hey, she replied, using the Navajo word for thank you that Nitsahakis had taught her earlier. The old woman's face softened slightly. You have strong spirit, she observed, like mountain lion, fierce but also wise. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Ashkey Diggins drew Mason aside. There is one more thing you should know, he said, his voice low. The men who came yesterday, before you arrived, they brought word that soldiers are looking for you both. There is a price now for the Apache woman alive, and for you, Mason Caldwell, dead or alive. What did you tell them? Mason asked, tension returning to his shoulders. Nothing yet, the headman replied. I said I would ask among my people if any had seen strangers. We'll leave at first light, Mason said grimly. We don't want to bring trouble to your clan. Ashkey Diggins clasped his arm in a warrior's grip. May Creator watch over your path. Dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold as they prepared to depart. The promised horses, sturdy Navajo ponies accustomed to the mountain terrain, were saddled and loaded with supplies. A young Navajo man delivered a sealed letter from Ashkey Diggins to Hollister, which Mason carefully tucked into his saddlebag. They left as the sun crested the horizon, heading south toward Fort Stanton. The land gradually opened before them, the dense pine forest giving way to more sparse juniper and pinyon as they descended from the foothills. They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, each lost in their own thoughts. Mason found himself studying Nalin when she wasn't looking. The straight line of her back, the confidence in her handling of the horse, the quiet alertness with which she scanned their surroundings. She rode not like someone fleeing, but like a warrior on a mission. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream, partially frozen but still flowing beneath a crust of ice. Mason built a small fire while Nellen unpacked some of the food Nitsa Hakis had provided: dried meat, corn cakes, and a mixture of nuts and dried berries. "What will we do if we find the fourth map piece?" Mason asked as they ate. "Even with all four pieces, Hayes and his men will still be looking for us, for the Silver River." Nayland considered his question, her dark eyes thoughtful. "First find River," she said at last. "Show Hayes cannot be trusted with sacred place. Then send truth to people who can help." "What people? The army? The territorial government?" Mason shook his head. "They're unlikely to side with us against a U.S. senator." "Not army," she agreed, "but Ashkey Diggins says there are men in Washington who speak for Indians. Few, but they exist. And men who write for newspapers in East. If they know Hayes kills to take sacred land, maybe they listen." It seemed a slim hope to Mason, but he couldn't deny the logic. Running would only last so long. Eventually they would be caught, or worse. But if they could somehow expose what Hayes was really after, perhaps they stood a chance. As they continued their journey, Mason noticed Nayland occasionally wincing when her horse moved over rough terrain. She had hidden her own injuries well, focusing on tending his fever, but the ordeal with Blackwood had clearly left its mark. "We'll stop early tonight," he decided as the afternoon waned. "Give the horses and ourselves more rest." Nolan didn't argue, which told him more than words how much she needed the respite. They made camp in a small canyon that offered shelter from the wind and concealment from any passing riders. After a simple meal, Mason checked the horses while Nolan prepared their bedrolls near the fire. When he returned, he found her examining the three map pieces again, spread carefully on a flat stone. Her finger traced the connected symbols with practiced ease, her lips moving silently as if reciting something from memory. "Can you make sense of it?" he asked, settling beside her. "Some, yes," she replied without looking up. "This," she pointed to a spiral, "means journey. This, a jagged line, means danger, mountain that swallows men. And these?" Mason indicated a series of dots arranged in a pattern. "Stars," she said, "to find a way when no moon." She pointed to another section. "These tell when to go, which moon, which season. Some places only open at certain times." Mason leaned closer, fascinated despite himself. "And this?" he asked, indicating a symbol that appeared on all three fragments, a circle with radiating lines like a sun. Nayland's expression grew solemn. "Silver River," she said quietly. "Sacred place where Earth's blood flows." "Earth's blood, what my people call silver," she explained again, seeing his confusion. "Blood of Mother Earth. Very powerful, very dangerous, if not respected." "So the map doesn't just show where the silver is," Mason realized. "It shows how to reach it safely." "Yes," she confirmed. "Ways in, ways out, times to go, times to stay away. Very old knowledge." "And Blackwood thought it was just a treasure map," Mason said, shaking his head at the irony. "White men rarely understand," Nayland said, though there was more sadness than bitterness in her voice. "They see only what can be taken, sold, not what must be protected, respected." "Not all white men," Mason said quietly. She met his eyes across the fire. "No," she agreed after a moment, "not all, not—" And they were quiet then, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the occasional call of a nightbird. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear desert air, a canopy of light stretching from horizon to horizon. "We should sleep," Mason said eventually. "We've got a long ride tomorrow." Nayland nodded, carefully rewrapping the map fragments and tucking them away. "I take first watch," she offered. Mason started to protest but stopped himself. She was as capable as he was, maybe more so in some ways, and they needed to trust each other if they were going to survive what lay ahead. "Wake me in 4 hours," he said instead. She nodded agreement, settling herself with her back against a rock, rifle across her knees. Mason stretched out near the fire, using his saddle as a pillow, and closed his eyes. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that for all the danger they faced, Despite the uncertainty of their quest, he was no longer alone. After years of solitude, of carrying the weight of Raven Ridge by himself, he now had someone who understood, who had walked a similar path of loss and survival. Whether they succeeded in their quest or not, that shared understanding was a gift he had never expected to receive. They rose before dawn and continued their journey south. The terrain grew increasingly arid as they descended from the highlands, red rock formations jutting from the earth like sentinels, sparse vegetation clinging to life in the harsh environment. Heat replaced cold as their main challenge, the winter sun still fierce in the cloudless sky. By mid-morning of their second day from the Navajo settlement, they reached a well-traveled road, the main route between Santa Fe and Fort Stanton. Here, caution became paramount. They kept to the ridges above the road, watching for patrols or posses that might be hunting them. From their vantage point, they observed several riders pass, traders with laden mules, a mail carrier riding hard and fast, a small detachment of soldiers heading north. The last group caused them to retreat further into cover, waiting until the dust from their passage had settled before continuing. "We'll need a story," Mason said as they rode parallel to the road, staying hidden among the pinyon and juniper. "We can't just ride into Fort Stanton. Every soldier there will have descriptions of us by now." Nolan nodded, her eyes scanning the landscape. "Need different clothes, different look." "We could claim to be traders," Mason suggested, "or settlers heading to Silver City." "They look for man with limp, woman with Apache marks," Nayland said, touching the tattoo on her shoulder. "Hard to hide." She was right. Mason's distinctive limp from his old war wound and Nolan's unmistakable features would make them recognizable to anyone with a description. They needed more than a story, they needed a disguise. Opportunity came in an unexpected form late that afternoon. As they topped a rise, they spotted a small homestead nestled in a valley below. A crude cabin, a corral with a few goats, and a vegetable garden protected by a rough fence. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home. "What do you think?" Mason asked, studying the isolated dwelling. "Might be a place to get supplies, maybe different clothes." "Could be trap," Nayland cautioned. "True, but we need help, and it's far enough from Fort Stanton that they might not have heard about us yet." He made a decision. "I'll go alone. Less suspicious. You watch from here. Cover me if there's trouble." Nayland didn't like it, but agreed. Mason left his rifle with her, keeping only his pistol, and approached the homestead openly, riding slowly so as not to appear threatening. As he neared the cabin, the door opened, and a man stepped out, shotgun in hand. He was old, perhaps 70, with a tangled white beard and weathered face. Behind him peered a woman of similar age, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "That's far enough, stranger," the old man called when Mason was about 30 yards away. "State your business." Mason reined in his pony and raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Just passing through," he called back. "Looking for supplies. Willing to pay fair." The old couple exchanged glances. "Where are you headed?" the man asked, still wary. "Silver City," Mason lied smoothly. "My wagon broke an axle back a ways. Partner's staying with it while I look for help." The mention of a broken wagon seemed to relax the old man slightly. Such misfortunes were common on the frontier, and helping travelers in distress was an unwritten code. "Got some supplies we could spare," the man allowed, lowering his shotgun a fraction. "Come on up, but slow-like." Mason dismounted, leading his pony the rest of the way. As he approached, he noted details he'd missed from a distance. The careful maintenance of the small garden, the goats that looked healthy despite the harsh conditions, the neat stack of firewood. These were people who survived through discipline and hard work. "Name's Josiah Miller," the old man said as Mason reached the cabin. "This is my wife, Martha." "John Smith," Mason replied, giving the first common name that came to mind. "Smith, huh?" Josiah's eyes twinkled with skepticism. "Lot of Smiths passing through these days." Mason felt a flash of concern, but the old man just chuckled. "Don't worry, son. Out here, a man's past is his own business. We don't ask questions, long as you don't bring trouble." "No trouble," Mason assured him. "Just need supplies. Food, water, maybe some clothes if you can spare them. Mine got pretty torn up on the trail." "Come inside," Martha spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly strong for such a frail-looking woman. Got stew on the fire and some cornbread, fresh baked. Mason hesitated, thinking of Nolan waiting in the hills. That's mighty kind, but I should get back to my partner before dark. Your partner can wait a spell, Josiah said firmly. No one refuses Martha's stew, not if they've got sense. Reluctantly, Mason followed them inside. The cabin was small but meticulously clean, every item in its place. A pot of stew bubbled on the hearth, filling the space with savory aromas that reminded Mason how long it had been since he'd eaten a proper home-cooked meal. Martha bustled about, setting an extra place at the rough-hewn table while Josiah poured water from a clay pitcher. Against his better judgment, Mason found himself sitting down, accepting a bowl of rabbit stew thick with vegetables. So, Smith, Josiah said as they ate, what brings you to these parts? Silver City's a long way for a man traveling light. Heard there's work in the mines, Mason replied, sticking to his story. Josiah didn't seem convinced. Funny thing, had some visitors yesterday. Army patrol looking for a man and woman. Man matching your description, though they said he'd have an Apache woman with him. Mason's hand instinctively moved toward his pistol, but Josiah waved him off. Easy now. If we'd meant to turn you in, wouldn't have invited you to supper. The old man's eyes hardened. We've got no love for the Army in this house. Not since they took our land back in '68, gave it to the railroad. The Western Union Railroad? Mason asked, suddenly alert. The very same, Martha confirmed, her voice bitter. Had a nice spread up north. Cavalry come in, said it was government land now. Made us move with just what we could carry in one wagon. This was Hayes's doing? Mason pressed. The old couple exchanged surprised glances. You know about Hayes? Josiah asked. I know he's working with the railroad to take land that doesn't belong to him. Mason decided to risk the truth. That's why they're hunting us. We have something he wants, something that could expose what he's really after. Josiah leaned back in his chair, studying Mason with new interest. So you're not John Smith headed for Silver City after all? No, Mason admitted. Name's Mason Caldwell, and I don't have a broken wagon. I have an Apache woman named Nolan hiding in the hills, watching us right now. We're trying to reach Samuel Hollister at Fort Stanton. Hollister? Martha's eyebrows rose. Old Sam's a good man, fair to everyone, white or Indian. You know him? Trade with him regular, Josiah confirmed. He gives better prices than the Fort Sutler. Doesn't water his whiskey neither. Mason made a decision. My companion and I need to reach him without being seen by the Army. We need different clothes, maybe a covered wagon to hide in. Josiah stroked his beard thoughtfully. Can't help with a wagon. But clothes, food, maybe a safer route to Hollister's that we can provide. He stood up. Best bring your friend in. Storm's coming, and these hills get dangerous in bad weather. Mason hesitated. How do I know I can trust you? Martha gave a harsh laugh. Boy, at our age, revenge is the only pleasure left. Anything that causes Hayes grief is fine by us. Their bitter sincerity convinced him. I'll get her. Nolan was understandably suspicious when Mason returned with his proposal, but the approaching storm and the promise of food and clean clothes eventually persuaded her. They approached the homestead together, Nalen's posture rigid with tension. Martha, to her credit, showed no reaction to Nalen's appearance beyond a curt nod of welcome. Come in, girl. Get warm. The evening that followed was surreal in its unexpected domesticity. The Millers shared their modest home without reservation, offering food, clothing, and most precious of all, information. Josiah knew the country between their homestead and Fort Stanton intimately, including routes the Army rarely patrolled. Follow this creek south, he explained, tracing the path on a rough map spread across the table. It'll take you through Miller's Canyon, named after my daddy, not that anyone remembers now. Army don't go there, too narrow for horses in formation. You'll come out about 2 miles east of Hollister's trading post. Martha, meanwhile, had assembled a bundle of clothing, faded dresses and shawls for Nalen, worn but sturdy trousers and shirts for Mason. Disguise won't fool anyone looking close, she warned, but from a distance, you'll look like any old settler couple. They spent the night in the Miller's root cellar, cold and cramped, but secure. Mason slept fitfully, aware of Nalen's silent presence beside him, of the trust she had placed in him by agreeing to this detour. When morning came, the promised storm had arrived, rain lashing against the cabin walls. Good, Josiah declared as they breakfasted on cornmeal mush. Rain'll hide your tracks. Best time to travel. They departed shortly after, dressed in their new clothes, their packs laden with food and supplies. Martha had even provided a battered old bonnet for Nolene, which helped conceal her distinctive features. Remember, Josiah cautioned as they prepared to leave, stick to the canyon. Hollister's usually opens his store at dawn. Get there early, before the soldiers come in for their morning whiskey. Thank you, Mason said, clasping the old man's hand. We won't forget this. Just make sure Hayes gets what's coming to him, Martha replied grimly. That'll be thanks enough. They rode away into the rain, following the creek as instructed. Miller's Canyon proved to be exactly as described, a narrow defile carved by water through red rock, barely wide enough for a single horse in places. The rain, though uncomfortable, provided excellent cover, washing away any tracks they might leave. As they navigated the treacherous path, Mason found himself thinking about the Millers and their unexpected kindness. Two old settlers, their lives upended by the same forces now hunting him and Nayland. It was a reminder that they weren't alone in their fight against Hayes and what he represented. Good people, Nayland commented suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. Lost much, still give. Yes, Mason agreed, touched by her perception. Reminds me that not everyone would side with Hayes if they knew the truth. They emerged from the canyon late that afternoon, the rain having subsided to a gentle drizzle. In the distance, they could see the smoke from Fort Stanton's chimneys, and closer, a solitary building that must be Hollister's trading post. We'll approach after dark, Mason decided. Less chance of being seen. As dusk fell, they made their way cautiously across the open ground, leading their horses to minimize their silhouette against the horizon. The trading post was a substantial building of adobe and timber, with several outbuildings and a corral. A few horses were visible in the yard, and smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home. They tied their horses in a stand of trees a short distance away and approached on foot. Through the windows, they could see the warm glow of lamps lighting the interior of the store. A sign on the door proclaimed Hollister's Trading Post in faded paint, with fair prices for all written beneath in smaller letters. Ready? Mason asked, his hand on the door. Nolene nodded, pulling the bonnet lower over her face. Ready? Together they stepped into Samuel Hollister's trading post in the next chapter of their journey. The interior of Hollister's trading post was larger than it appeared from outside, the walls lined with shelves containing everything from basic provisions to luxury goods. Rifles hung on racks, bolts of cloth were stacked in corners, and glass cases displayed jewelry, watches, and other valuables. The air was thick with the mingled scents of leather, tobacco, coffee, and spices. Behind a long counter at the back stood a man Mason assumed must be Samuel Hollister. He was older than Mason had expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with a shock of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His face was weathered but intelligent, blue eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows. As they entered, Hollister looked up from the ledger he was writing in, studying them with obvious interest. A young Navajo boy, no more than 12, was sweeping the floor and paused to watch the newcomers. Evening, Hollister called, his voice carrying the musical lilt of Ireland despite decades in America. Store's about to close, but if it's urgent, I can help you. Mason approached the counter, keeping his face partially turned away from the Navajo boy. We're looking for Samuel Hollister, he said quietly. You've found him, the trader replied, his expression growing more curious. And you are? Friends of Ashkee Dighin, Mason said, reaching slowly into his jacket and withdrawing the sealed letter. He sent this for you. Hollister accepted the letter, examining the seal before breaking it open. His eyes moved rapidly across the page, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern, and finally to cautious resolve. Atakai, he said to the Navajo boy, finish up and go home to your mother. Tell her I won't need you tomorrow. The boy looked disappointed, probably counting on the day's wages, but nodded obediently. Yes, Mr. Hollister. He completed his sweeping, then slipped out the front door, casting one last curious glance at the strangers. As soon as he was gone, Hollister moved to the windows, pulling down the shades and locking the front door. So, he said, turning back to them, you're the ones the Army's looking for, Mason Caldwell and an Apache woman, though they don't have your name, miss. Nylon, she supplied, removing the bonnet now that they were alone. Hollister's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her tattoo. Eagle Clan, he murmured. Thought you were all gone after Raven Ridge. All but one, she confirmed quietly. The trader gestured toward a door at the back. Come through to my quarters. Not safe to talk out here. Never know who might be listening. They followed him through the door into a cluttered room that served as both living space and private study. Books lined the walls, interspersed with native artifacts, maps, and curiosities from various tribes. A fire burned in a small hearth, and a desk covered in papers occupied one corner. Sit, Hollister said, indicating a pair of worn armchairs. You both look dead on your feet. As they gratefully sank into the chairs, Hollister moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. He poured generous measures and handed them around, then took a seat opposite his unexpected guests. Now, he said after taking a long swallow, tell me what's really going on and why you're foolish enough to come within 10 miles of a fort that's actively looking for you. Mason took a small sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through his tired body. We're looking for something, Hollister. Something you might have. An old Apache artifact, a piece of hide with symbols drawn on it, part of a map. Hollister's eyebrows rose. A map? He glanced at Nayland. Is that what Blackwood was after? What he hurt you for? Nalin nodded once, her face impassive. The trader leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. I might have something like that, he admitted. Came to me years ago from a soldier who'd been at Raven Ridge. Said he found it on a dead medicine man. Mason and Nayland exchanged a glance. This was promising, a 4th piece of the map, potentially bringing them closer to completing the puzzle. Can we see it? Mason asked. Hollister studied them both, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. First, tell me why you're looking for it. The whole truth, mind. I've known Ashkey Dighin too long to be fooled by half measures. So Mason told him about finding Nayland, about the ceremonial circle, about Blackwood's obsession with the Apache gold that was actually silver. He explained about the sacred sites and how Hayes wanted the land not just for tracks, but for what lay beneath it. He left nothing out, including their encounter with Ashkey Dighin and their narrow escape from the miller's homestead. Throughout the telling, Hollister listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When Mason finished, the trader drained his glass and refilled it. I always knew Blackwood was a cold bastard, he said finally. But this is something else entirely. He shook his head. And you say there's someone in Washington behind it all. Senator Hayes, Mason confirmed, according to Ashkey Dighin, a man who worships power and money. Hollister rose and moved to a large oak cabinet against one wall. From it, he withdrew a small wooden box intricately carved with tribal designs. He brought it to the desk and opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in faded red cloth, lay a piece of hide similar to the 3 fragments they already possessed. The same strange symbols were drawn upon it, though the section of terrain it depicted was different. I've had scholars look at this, Hollister said, gently lifting the artifact. None could make sense of it. Some thought it religious, others astronomical. None guessed it was a map. Nalin rose and approached the desk, her movements respectful. May I? She asked. Hollister handed her the hide piece. She held it reverently, her fingers tracing the symbols with practiced ease. This shows path through Guardian Cave, she said softly. Where water runs under stone, sacred place. Mason joined her at the desk, withdrawing the 3 fragments they carried. When placed together with Hollister's piece, they formed a larger section of the map, though still incomplete in places where the hide had deteriorated over time. How many pieces in total? Hollister asked. 4, Mason replied. We have them all now. And what will you do with them? The trader asked, his tone neutral. Mason looked at Nalin. This was her heritage, her people's secret. The decision should be hers. Find Silver River, she said firmly. Stop Hayes from taking it. Show truth to people who can help protect sacred land. That's a dangerous path, Hollister warned. Hayes isn't just any senator. He has connections throughout the territory, influence with the army, friends in high places. He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. We know the risk, Mason acknowledged, but we can't run forever. Eventually they'll catch us. This is our only chance to stop him. Hollister was quiet for a moment, studying the assembled map fragments. You realize what you're up against, he said finally. It's not just Blackwood's men, or even the army. If there's someone in Washington pulling strings, they won't stop until they have what they want. We know, Mason said, but we have to try. The traitor nodded slowly. All right then, I'm in. The piece is yours, and I'll help however I can. Relief washed over Mason. Having an ally, especially one with Hollister's connections, improved their chances significantly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Hollister replied grimly. You still need to get out of here alive. The fort's been on alert since word came about Blackwood. Patrols everywhere, checking everyone who passes through. We need supplies, Mason said. Food, ammunition, fresh horses, if possible. I can help with most of that, the trader agreed. But horses will be tricky. Every mount in the area is accounted for, and questions would be asked. He thought for a moment. There's a Mescalero camp about 20 miles southeast. They owe me some favors. If you can make it there, I can send word ahead. They might provide horses and guides who know the territory better than any white man. Nalin looked up sharply. Mescalero not always friends with my people. These ones have no quarrel with anyone except the army, Hollister assured her. Their headman, Maka, is a reasonable sort, more interested in peace than old feuds. Mason considered the option. It was risky, but everything they did now carried risk. All right, he agreed. If you can send word, we'll try for the Mescalero camp. You'll need to leave before dawn, Hollister said. Sleep here tonight. I'll gather what you need and wake you early. The offer of safe shelter was too welcome to refuse. After a simple meal that Hollister prepared, the first hot food they had had since leaving the Navajo settlement, they spread blankets near the fire. As they settled in for the night, Mason felt a cautious optimism beginning to take root. They had the fourth map piece. They had an ally in Hollister. If they could reach the Mescalero camp and get horses, they might actually have a chance of finding the Silver River and uncovering the truth behind Hayes's deadly obsession. But as he drifted towards sleep, a nagging doubt remained. Hayes had already proven willing to kill to protect his secret. What else would he do to stop them from exposing him? They left Hollister's trading post in the gray hour before dawn, slipping out through a side door. The trader had been generous, providing them with new packs filled with food, ammunition, medical supplies, and other essentials. He had also given them rough hand-drawn maps of the territory southeast of Fort Stanton, marking the location of the Mescalero camp and the terrain they would need to navigate to reach it. I've sent a rider ahead, Hollister had told them as they prepared to leave. An Apache boy who works for me sometimes. He'll reach the camp well before you, explain the situation to Maka. Now as they made their way through the pre-dawn darkness, Mason found himself grateful once again for Nalin's keen senses. She moved with the confidence of one who could read the land even in near darkness, leading them safely away from the trading post and into the hills beyond. They traveled steadily through the morning, pushing southeast as Hollister had directed. The terrain here was more forgiving than the badlands they had crossed earlier, rolling hills covered in grass and scattered juniper, with clear streams running through the valleys. Under different circumstances, it would have been pleasant country to traverse. Around midday, they paused near a stream to rest and fill their canteens. As Mason knelt by the water, a movement in the sky caught his attention, a large bird circling high above. Eagle, Nayland said, following his gaze. Her voice held a mix of reverence and sadness. Watching over us. Is that a good sign? Mason asked, remembering her tattoo and the significance of the eagle to her clan. She considered the question, her face tilted up to the circling bird. Message from ancestors, she said finally. Telling us path is right, but danger still comes. Mason nodded, accepting her interpretation. In his years on the frontier, he had learned to respect such beliefs, even when he didn't fully share them. Something about the eagle's presence did feel significant, as if they were being observed by forces beyond their understanding. As they continued their journey, Mason noticed a subtle change in Nayland. She had always been reserved, careful with her words, but now there was a new intensity to her focus, a sense of purpose that seemed to grow stronger with each mile that brought them closer to their goal. Tell me more about your grandfather, he said as they rode side by side through a meadow bright with wildflowers. Ashki Diggin said he was a keeper of ceremonies. Nayland was silent for so long that Mason thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with memory. My grandfather was Nantai, medicine man of Eagle Clan, knew old ways, old songs, could talk to spirits, heal sick. Pride mingled with sorrow in her tone. He teach me some things before Raven Ridge. Say women must keep knowledge when men die in war. In the Silver River, he taught you about that? She nodded, which Silver River is oldest secret, place where Creator's power still lives in earth. Grandfather say Silver River water can heal any wound, make weak strong again, but only if approached with respect. She glanced at Mason, gauging his reaction. White men think this is superstition. But Ashki Diggin's son proves truth. Mason thought about the Navajo headman's story of his son's miraculous recovery after being treated with water from the Silver River. He had seen enough in his life to know that there were things in this world that defied simple explanation. I believe you, he said simply. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise and something else, perhaps gratitude, flickering across her face. The guardians at the cave entrance, Mason continued. What are they? What do they guard against? Not what, Nayland corrected. Who? Spirits of ancestors who watched over Silver River since beginning. They test those who seek to enter. Judge if worthy. Her expression grew serious. Need right words, right offerings. Need pure heart. Those who come with greed, with bad intentions, they never leave cave. And Hayes, if he finds the river? His men die, she said with certainty. River defends itself from those who would harm it, but not before great damage done. She frowned. Hayes has many men, would send more and more until way found through. That is why we must reach River first, show truth before more die. The gravity of their mission settled over Mason anew. This wasn't just about exposing Hayes or clearing their names. It was about preventing a tragedy, the desecration of a sacred site, the potential loss of many lives, the destruction of something precious and irreplaceable. By late afternoon, they had covered a significant distance, thanks to the favorable terrain and their determination. According to Hollister's map, they were now less than half a day's journey from the Mescalero camp. We'll stop here for the night, Mason decided as they reached a small valley sheltered by rocky outcroppings. Push on to the camp in the morning. They made camp with the efficiency of those now accustomed to traveling together, each understanding their role without need for discussion. Mason gathered wood and built a fire while Nalin prepared a simple meal from their provisions. As darkness fell, they ate in companionable silence, the fire casting flickering shadows on the rocks around them. After they had finished, Nalin took something from her pack, a small leather pouch tied with sinew. Opening it carefully, she removed a pinch of what looked like dried herbs and cast them into the fire. Instantly, a sweet, pungent aroma filled the air. Prayer to ancestors, she explained, seeing Mason's curious look, asking for protection on journey. She hesitated, then offered him the pouch. You too, if you wish. Mason was touched by the gesture, understanding its significance. She was inviting him to participate in a sacred ritual, to connect with her ancestors in a way few white men ever had. With careful reverence, he took a small pinch of the herbs and cast them into the flames as she had done. The fire flared briefly, sending sparks spiraling upward into the night sky. What do I say? He asked softly. Speak from heart, Nayland replied. Ancestors listen to truth, not fancy words. Mason closed his eyes, feeling somewhat self-conscious, but determined to honor her trust. I ask for strength to complete this journey, he said simply, for wisdom to know the right path, for forgiveness for past wrongs. When he opened his eyes, he found Nalin watching him, her expression thoughtful. Good prayer, she said, honest. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Mason found himself thinking about the strange path that had led him here, from Union soldier to frontier scout, from participant in the Raven Ridge massacre to ally of its sole survivor, from solitary hermit to companion on a quest that seemed more legend than reality. If someone had told him a month ago that he would be sharing a campfire with an Apache woman, praying to her ancestors, and hunting for a mythical river of silver, he would have thought them mad. Yet here he was, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, his existence having purpose beyond mere survival. As he took the first watch, rifle across his knees, he gazed up at the star-filled sky and pondered the twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. Whatever came next, success or failure, life or death, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The eagle returned at dawn, circling overhead as they broke camp and continued their journey. Mason took its reappearance as a positive sign, though he kept such thoughts to himself, not wanting to seem foolish to Nalin, who understood these omens far better than he. They reached the outskirts of the Mescalero camp by mid-morning. From a ridge overlooking the encampment, they could see it was larger than they had expected. Perhaps 30 structures arranged in a rough circle, with corrals for horses and areas for communal activities. People moved about their daily tasks, the scene one of ordinary tribal life rather than the war camp often depicted in lurid newspaper accounts. "How should we approach?" Mason asked, aware that arriving unannounced at an Apache camp could be dangerous, even with Hollister's messenger having gone ahead. "Wait here," Nayland decided. "I go first, speak to sentries. Eagle Clan sign will show I come in peace." Mason wasn't comfortable with her going alone but recognized the wisdom of her suggestion. A white man approaching an Apache camp uninvited might be met with immediate hostility, while a woman of their own kind would at least be given a chance to explain her presence. "Be careful," he said simply. Nalin gave him a look that was almost amused. "Always careful," she replied, then made her way down the ridge toward the camp. Mason watched anxiously as she approached the perimeter, where two mounted warriors intercepted her. There was a brief exchange, too distant for him to hear. One of the warriors galloped back toward the main camp, while the other remained with Nalin. Time stretched uncomfortably as Mason waited, his hand never far from his weapon. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, a small group emerged from the camp and approached Nalin's position. In the lead was an older man on a paint pony, his bearing marking him as a person of authority. There was another exchange, longer this time. Mason saw Nalin make a gesture toward the ridge where he waited. Several heads turned in his direction. Finally, the older man raised an arm and beckoned. Taking this as his cue, Mason mounted his horse and rode carefully down the slope, making no sudden movements. As he approached, he could see the assembled group more clearly. The older man, who was likely Maka, the two warriors who had first intercepted Nalin, and a younger man who bore a striking resemblance to Hollister's messenger. Nalin's expression revealed nothing as he joined them, but he sensed a certain tension in her posture. The negotiations had not gone as smoothly as they might have hoped. "This is Mason," she said in English, gesturing to him. "Man I told you about, enemy of Hayes." Maka studied Mason with piercing dark eyes. He was perhaps 50, with a face lined by sun and experience, his long hair streaked with gray. Unlike the younger warriors, who wore expressions of open hostility, his face revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Hollister vouches for you," Maka said in surprisingly good English. "Says you fight against those who would steal our sacred places. But why should I trust a white soldier who helped kill Apache at Raven Ridge?" The direct accusation startled Mason, though he shouldn't have been surprised that news of his past had traveled so quickly among the tribes. "I cannot undo what happened at Raven Ridge," he replied honestly, "but I can try to prevent it from happening again. Hayes seeks the Silver River for his own gain. He doesn't care how many Apache die in the process. I do." Maka studied Mason with penetrating eyes, the tense silence stretching between them as the Mescalero headman considered his words. Maka's face revealed little, but his eyes held the weight of decades of broken promises. "My father trusted white soldiers once," he said quietly. "They promised peace, protection. Next winter, half our people died when forced from hunting grounds." He studied Mason's face carefully. "Yet Hollister speaks well of you. And this woman," he nodded toward Nayland, "last of Eagle Clan, seeks your help, not your blood." Something shifted in the headman's expression. "I too lost family to Blackwood's raids. 10 summers ago, my youngest brother died defending our water rights against men who claimed to represent Senator Hayes." Mason hadn't known this connection. "Hayes was behind that too?" "Many things tie back to that man," Maka confirmed. The Mescalero have watched him take Apache land, Navajo land. Now he reaches for sacred places. He straightened, decision made. I help you not just for Silver River. I help because some debts must be paid. Words are easy, Maka finally said. White men have spoken many pretty words to Apache people. Treaties, promises, all broken like dry twigs. He gestured toward the encampment. We need to see truth in a man's heart. How? Mason asked, meeting the headman's gaze directly. Among Mescalero, one who seeks wisdom of ancestors must face a trial. Vision quest. He pointed to a small mesa rising from the valley floor. There on Spirit Mountain. Alone, no food, no water. One day, one night. If spirits accept you, they will speak. Mason glanced at Nolan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I accept, he said firmly. Maka seemed surprised by his immediate agreement. You understand, white man? This is not game. Vision quest brings man face to face with deepest fears, deepest truths. Many Apache warriors have failed this test. I understand. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Tahoma returned with Maka. The headman carried a small clay bowl filled with a dark, steaming liquid. Time has come, Maka announced. Drink, then go to Spirit Mountain. Mason took the bowl and drank the contents in one swallow. The taste was acrid and earthy, burning his throat. May your journey bring truth, Maka said formally. Nolan touched Mason's arm briefly. Be strong, she said softly. Remember why we do this. The climb was arduous, the medicine's effects making rock seem to breathe beneath Mason's hands, the sky pulsing with impossible colors. At the summit, a circle of stones about 15 feet in diameter marked the sacred space. Mason sat cross-legged at its center, facing the setting sun. As darkness fell, shadowy figures emerged. The dead of Raven Ridge. Women with children, elders, young warriors with fresh wounds. Their eyes fixed on him, accusatory and questioning. I'm sorry, he whispered. I tried to stop it. I failed. Then stepping from the ghostly procession came Elizabeth and Sarah, just as in the photograph he carried. You weren't there, Elizabeth said softly. We needed you, and you weren't there. I know, he managed, his voice breaking. I should have been with you. I'm so sorry. You've been punishing yourself too long, Elizabeth said, hiding from life, from love, from purpose. Her hand reached toward him. It's time to let go. How? He asked desperately. How do I live with this? By living fully, by finding meaning in what remains. As they faded, Mason found himself face to face with Blackwood. Not the older man he had killed, but the younger colonel who had ordered the Raven Ridge massacre. You were weak, Caldwell, Blackwood said coldly. Too soft to do what was necessary. What you did wasn't necessary, Mason responded. It was murder. Blackwood's form began to waver. The orders came from above. I just carried them out. As did the men who pulled the triggers. As did I, when I failed to stop you. We're all responsible for our choices, Blackwood. All of us. The apparition dissolved, replaced by a younger Nolan, her eyes bright with hope and life. You see now? She asked. Why our quest matters. Yes, Mason answered. It's not just about stopping Hayes or protecting the Silver River. It's about justice for Raven Ridge, for all the wrongs that were never made right. She smiled. Justice, yes, but also healing. For land, for people, for you. She placed her hand over his heart. Here, too, new growth possible. The Silver River, Mason said with sudden understanding. It's real, isn't it? Not just a legend or a silver deposit. Something more. Nolan nodded. Place where worlds touch, where Earth's heart beats close to surface. I won't let that happen, Mason vowed. I swear it. When Tahoma came for him at sunrise, Mason was standing at the edge of the stone circle, facing east. You survived night, the young Apache observed. What did you see? Mason turned to him, his eyes clear despite his exhaustion. Truth, he said simply. In the central clearing, Maka sat waiting with Nolan and several tribal elders. You have completed Vision Quest, Maka stated. What did spirits show you? They showed me the past I've been running from, the future I've been afraid to embrace. Mason paused. They showed me that the Silver River isn't just a place or a resource to be claimed. It's a trust. a responsibility. Maka nodded slowly. Spirits have spoken to you, white man. Rare honor. He rose to his feet. Mescalero will help you reach Silver River. 2 guides, 2 horses, supplies for journey. Thank you, Maka. The headman raised a hand. One condition. If you find Silver River, you must not take from it, not even small piece. You may look, but you must leave as Creator placed it. Of course, Mason agreed. We seek to protect, not to take. That evening, the Mescalero held a ceremony for them, and Maka presented them with amulets of polished stone. Protection on journey, he explained. Stone from sacred mountain carries good medicine. As Mason slipped the amulet over his head, he felt a strange sense of belonging. For the first time since finding Nalan in that snowy clearing, he felt they truly had a chance to succeed. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Mescalero camp. Kama and Tahoma were waiting, their horses saddled and loaded with supplies. Maka says start now, Tahoma informed them. Long journey to mountain entrance, 2 days of weather good. Maka appeared to bid them farewell. Go with courage, he said in English. Return with truth. They rode from the camp, heading toward the distant silhouette of the Sierra Blanca Mountains. Kama set a brisk pace, following game trails and ancient pathways barely visible to Mason's eye. As they rode, Mason noticed how Kim constantly scanned their surroundings, his movements precise and deliberate. Unlike the more talkative Tahoma, Kami maintained a watchful silence. Your guide seems very skilled, Mason commented to Nalan when they paused to water the horses. Kim is Maka's eldest grandson, she replied, was training to be warrior before army pushed Mescalero to reservation. Later, when Tahoma went ahead to scout the trail, Kami unexpectedly spoke to Mason in careful English. My father died fighting soldiers, he said without preamble. I was 12 summers, learned to track, to hunt, to survive. I'm sorry about your father, Mason offered. Kime's gaze was steady. Grandfather says you different from other white soldiers, says you seek to right wrongs. He touched a scar that ran along his forearm. I believe when I see. It wasn't friendship, but it was honesty, something Mason respected more than empty words. Fair enough, he replied. That evening, Mason watched as Kim expertly prepared snares and taught Nalan a mescalero technique for setting them. His hands moved with the confident precision of someone who had learned survival as necessity, not choice. There was more to this quiet young man than initially met the eye, a depth of knowledge and resilience that spoke of hardships overcome. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses. Tahoma pointed to the mountains dominating the western horizon. As Tahoma explained features of the landscape, Mason noticed the young man's enthusiasm. Unlike Keme's stoic demeanor, Tahoma spoke with animated gestures, his knowledge of the terrain impressive for one so young. You know these mountains well, Mason observed. Tahoma smiled, a flash of pride crossing his face. I walk every trail since small boy. Grandfather, Maka's brother, taught me before he died. His expression grew serious. He say mountains have stories. Man who listens to mountains never gets lost. Later that day, when they passed a unique rock formation, Tahoma paused. Story says great warrior turned to stone here, watching for enemies who threaten his people. He glanced at Mason with unexpected vulnerability. Before soldiers came, I trained to be medicine man, not warrior. Learned plants, healing songs, old stories. He touched a small medicine pouch at his waist. Now few chances to use this knowledge. Mason understood then. Tahoma helped them not just on Maka's orders, but because it gave him purpose, a chance to use skills from a life that was disappearing. The young man moved between two worlds, the traditional ways he'd been taught and the harsh new reality imposed on his people. When Nalin asked about certain plants along their path, Tahoma's face lit up with knowledge long held but rarely shared. He showed her which leaves could stop bleeding, which roots could fight fever. For a brief moment, he was not just a guide but a teacher, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Sierra Blanca, he explained, very sacred place. Many spirits live there. Have you been to the Silver River? Mason asked. Tahoma shook his head. No, not for Mescalero to go there. That is Apache place. He glanced at Nalin with respect. Only special people like Nalin know way. But you know how to reach the entrance? Yes, Tahoma confirmed. No way to Guardian Cave. After that, Nalin must lead. As they sat around the fire that evening, Keem unexpectedly spoke, addressing Nalin in Apache. When their conversation ended, Mason looked to Nalin for explanation. Kami says soldiers passed through Valley yesterday, she translated. Big group, not just patrol, moving toward mountains. Hayes's men, Mason asked. Maybe, Nalin replied grimly. Kimi saw white man in fancy clothes with them. Not soldier, but giving orders. Hayes himself, Mason concluded. How many men? 20, maybe more, with pack mules, equipment. This changed everything. They had hoped to reach the Silver River ahead of any major expedition, but now Hayes had mobilized a significant force and was already moving into position. How far ahead of us are they? Mason asked. Half day, maybe, Tahoma answered. They follow main trail. We take secret way, maybe catch up. We need to leave at first light, Mason decided. Push harder tomorrow. As they prepared for sleep, Mason studied the assembled map pieces. The combined sections showed a complex route through the mountains, leading to a narrow canyon that ended at a cave entrance. Here, Nalin said, pointing to a symbol near the cave entrance. This is Guardian Spirit. Needs special words to pass. Her finger moved to another symbol. This where river begins. Silver water flows from rock, makes pool. And the fourth piece? What does it show that we're missing? Words, she replied. Sacred words to speak to guardians, but I know them. She tapped her temple. Grandfather made me memorize many times. These guardians, they're dangerous? Nalin's expression was solemn. Very dangerous. Those who enter with bad heart, with greed or hate, never come out again. They rose before dawn, Kime and Tahoma leading them on a different path than before, picking their way through narrow defiles and steep ravines. Secret trail, Tahoma explained. Old Apache way, soldiers never find. By midday, they had made considerable progress. As Nalin knelt by a stream to fill her canteen, she suddenly went still. What is it? Mason asked. Voices, she replied softly. Down valley. Many men. Leaving their horses secured, they crept up a ridge to peer over. Below stretched a small valley, through which moved a column of men, soldiers in uniform mixed with civilian guides and pack mules laden with equipment. At the head rode a distinguished-looking man in expensive clothing. Hayes, Mason murmured. Most concerning were the crates strapped to several mules, which looked like mining equipment and explosives. They planned to blast, Nalin said, her voice tight with anger. Destroy sacred cave to get silver. How far to the cave entrance from here? Mason asked. Half day's ride, Kimi replied. They reached by evening. And our route? Faster, but harder. Can be there same time if hurry. They retreated and returned to their horses, setting out immediately on the challenging path. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered around the peaks, thunder rumbling in the distance. Bad sign, Tahoma commented nervously. Mountain spirits angry. They pushed on through the gathering storm. Rain began to fall, turning the trail to slippery mud. Not much further, Tahoma shouted over a crash of thunder. Canyon ahead. As they reached the canyon entrance, a flash of lightning illuminated fresh tracks in the mud and broken branches. Hayes' men already passed through here, Mason called. Not long ago. Just as Mason was about to suggest they light torches, Tahoma called out from the lead position. Look, ahead. Through the gloom and rain, they could make out multiple points of light. Hayes' men had stopped, perhaps making camp for the night or preparing for their entry into the cave. They crept forward until they could observe Hayes' camp without being seen. The expedition had halted just short of where the canyon opened into a small valley. In the center of the activity stood Senator Hayes, issuing instructions. They make camp, Nalin whispered, relief evident. Not going to cave tonight. Where exactly is the cave entrance? Mason asked Kimi. The young mescalero pointed to a dark opening barely visible in the rock face beyond the camp. There, behind big rock that looks like bear. Can we reach it without being seen? Kimi nodded. Yes, go around, but dangerous and dark. We have to try, Mason insisted. Once they're settled for the night, we'll make our move. As the camp quieted, Mason and Nayland gathered only what they would need: water, the map pieces, a small lantern, and their weapons. Ready? Mason asked. Her face was solemn, but her eyes held fierce determination. Ready. Time to finish journey. It took nearly an hour to circle around to the bear-shaped boulder that marked the cave entrance. Behind this natural sentinel, a dark opening gaped in the mountainside. Wait, Nayland whispered as Mason moved toward the entrance. Must prepare first. She knelt and placed several items at the cave entrance: dried herbs, a feather, and a piece of turquoise. She spoke softly in Apache, her voice barely audible above the wind. When she had finished, she looked up at him. Now we may enter. But remember, speak only truth inside. Guardians know when man lies, even to himself. Nalin lit their lantern, and they stepped into the cave. The entrance was narrow, forcing them to proceed single file. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Which way now? Mason asked. Nalin pointed to a smaller opening on the far side. There, follow water path. They followed a small stream that flowed across the chamber floor. The second passage was narrower, requiring them to stoop in places. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy Mason couldn't identify, but could definitely feel. We approach Guardian Place, Nayland explained softly. Very powerful, very dangerous. Follow exactly what I do. The passage widened suddenly, opening into a roughly circular chamber. The walls were covered with ancient paintings, figures of animals and spirits rendered in red, black, and white pigments. Nalin halted, raising her hand in warning. Guardian Circle. Must pass with right words, right heart. In the center of the chamber was a circle of stones similar to the one Mason had occupied during his vision quest. Beyond it, the passage continued deeper into the mountain. I speak to guardians, Nayland said. You stay silent. Think only pure thoughts. She handed him the lantern, then stepped forward alone. As she reached the stone circle, she began to speak. Not in everyday Apache, but in what sounded like an older, more formal version of the language. As she spoke, the painted figures on the walls seemed to shift and move in the lantern light. The air grew thicker, and a low humming sound filled the chamber. Mason felt a presence, no, multiple presences, watching, evaluating, judging. Suddenly, every painted figure flared with an internal light, illuminating the entire chamber in an unearthly glow. The paintings were truly moving, the spirit figures and animals hovering just above the wall. At the forefront was a massive eagle and a great serpent with iridescent scales, the primary guardians that formed the symbol of Nalin's clan. Nalin's voice rose to a crescendo, then stopped. The eagle spirit seemed to look directly at her, and though no sound emerged that Mason could hear, he saw Nalin nod as if responding. She turned and beckoned to Mason. Come, they will let us pass, but you must speak your purpose, your true heart. Mason approached the stone circle. The eagle's gaze shifted to him, and he felt the weight of judgment pressing upon him. I come not to take, but to protect, he said, his voice steady. To keep the Silver River safe from those who would exploit it. To make right a wrong that began at Raven Ridge, when the last of Eagle Clan survived against all odds. The eagle spirit's gaze intensified, seeming to look into his very soul. I have not always been a good man, he continued. I've fought in wars, taken lives, failed to prevent atrocities. But I stand here now offering what remains of my life in service to this purpose. Not for redemption, but because it is right. After what seemed an eternity, the eagle dipped its head in acknowledgement. The snake performed a similar gesture, its body forming a momentary circle before straightening. The stone circle began to glow with a soft, silvery light, illuminating a path beyond. They accept, Nayland said with a relief. We may pass to Silver River. Together they followed the illuminated path deeper into the mountain. The air grew warmer with a strange metallic tang. The sound of water reached them, not gentle dripping, but a stronger flow, almost musical. The passage widened again, and then they emerged into a vast underground chamber that stole the breath from Mason's lungs. The Silver River lay before them, a flowing stream of what appeared to be liquid silver, emerging from the rock wall at one end and disappearing into the floor at the other. The entire chamber was illuminated by its glow, the walls sparkling with embedded veins of pure silver. Crystal formations lined the river's banks, throwing rainbow hues across the silvery surface. The air itself seemed charged with energy, tingling against Mason's skin. "The silver river," Nayland whispered with awe. "Earth's blood. Creator's gift." As they approached the riverbank, Mason could see that the glow came not just from the water, but from what lay beneath it. The riverbed was lined with veins of pure, native silver, visible even through the water's depth. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. "It's not just silver ore, it's perfect." "Yes," Nayland agreed. "Or silver, not mixed with earth or stone. This why Hayes wants it. For weapons, for machines that need perfect metal." "Could this really be used for weapons?" he asked. Nolan nodded gravely. "Grandfather says silver river metal has power, makes weapons stronger, more deadly, makes machines that harness lightning work better. And if Hayes mines it, destroys this place? Not just lose sacred place, disturb balance. Silver river connected to mountain, to land. Water goes deep, joins other waters. If poisoned here, spreads poison everywhere." Mason stood, understanding the full scope of what was at stake. This wasn't just about a sacred site. The Silver River was an integral part of the ecosystem, its waters eventually joining watersheds that supported countless communities downstream. "We need to document this," he said. "Find a way to prove what's here, why it's sacred, why it must be protected." Nolan nodded. From her pack, she withdrew a small leather pouch. "For proof," she explained. "Water from river, stone from bank. Things allowed to leave if taken with respect." They collected samples, a small vial of the silvery water, several stones from the riverbank bearing traces of pure silver. "What now?" Nayland asked when they had finished. "How we stop them from taking this place?" "We need to get this information to people who can help," Mason said. "Newspapers in the East, scientists who would understand the importance of studying this properly, people in Congress who advocate for Indian rights. How we reach them? We are hunted, wanted." "Hollister," Mason said after a moment. "He has connections, and he believed in what we're doing." As they prepared to leave, a distant sound froze them in place. Voices echoing through the passages, growing louder. Hayes and his men had entered the cave. "They come," Nayland whispered, her eyes wide. "Too soon." Mason quickly extinguished their lantern. "Is there another way out? A different passage?" Nayland shook her head. "Only one way in, one way out. Must go back through Guardian Chamber." "The Guardians," Mason said suddenly. "You said they test those who seek to enter. Judge if worthy. What will happen when Hayes and his men reach the Guardian Chamber?" "Guardians protect river, but—" She hesitated. "Many men might die. Bad deaths." Mason considered this grimly. He had no love for Hayes, but the deaths of 20 men would solve nothing. "We need to warn them," he decided. "Try to turn them back before they reach the Guardians." "They not listen to us," Nayland pointed out. "Then we'll have to be very convincing," Mason replied, checking his pistol. "Come on, we need to intercept them before they reach the Guardian Chamber." They moved quickly back up the tunnel, guided by the eerie glow that lingered in their vision. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the clatter of equipment and the harsh light of multiple lanterns. They positioned themselves just beyond the entrance to the Guardian Chamber. Mason drew his pistol, but didn't aim it. Nolan stood at his side, her face composed but alert. The lead elements of Hayes's expedition appeared around the bend. 2 soldiers with rifles, followed by a surveyor, and then Hayes himself, elegant even in expedition attire. "That's far enough," Mason called, his voice echoing in the confined space. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Hayes held up a hand. "Well," he said, his voice controlled, "you must be Caldwell, the scout who killed my associate, Colonel Blackwood." "I am," Mason confirmed. "And this is Nayland of the Eagle Clan. We're here to warn you, Senator Hayes. You're approaching a place you don't understand, and it will destroy you if you proceed." Hayes regarded them with cool amusement. "Is that a threat, Mr. Caldwell?" "A warning," Mason corrected. "This cave is protected by forces beyond your understanding. The Silver River isn't just a valuable resource. It's a sacred place, guarded by spirits that judge the intentions of those who seek to enter." A ripple of unease passed through some of Hayes's men, but Hayes merely smiled. Spirits? Guardians? He chuckled. I expected better from a former Army officer, Caldwell. I've seen things in this cave that defy explanation, Mason said firmly. Progress always has a price, Caldwell, Hayes replied. The weak make way for the strong. He straightened his shoulders. Now I suggest you both step aside. We have work to do. We can't let you pass, Hayes, the senator sighed. Lieutenant, he called, remove these obstacles. The soldiers advanced, rifles leveled. Just as the confrontation seemed inevitable, a low humming filled the tunnel. The painted figures on the distant walls of the guardian chamber began to glow, visible even from where they stood. What trickery is this? Hayes demanded, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Not trickery, Nayland said solemnly. Guardians awake. They feel your intentions. The humming grew louder, and a gust of wind, impossible in the sealed cave, swept through the tunnel, extinguishing several lanterns. Superstitious nonsense, Hayes declared, though his face had paled. Relight those lanterns. We continue forward. Hayes, listen to me, Mason tried one last time. I've seen the Silver River. It's unlike anything you can imagine, a wonder that should be studied, not exploited. Enough, Hayes snapped. Lieutenant, arrest these two. The officer and two soldiers moved forward, but before they could reach Mason and Nayland, the earth beneath them shuddered. A low rumble built rapidly to a deafening roar as the tunnel began to shake. Dust and small rocks rained from the ceiling. Earthquake! Someone shouted. Panic erupted among Hayes's men. Some fled back the way they had come. Others froze in terror as larger rocks began to fall. Mason pulled Nayland against the wall where an outcropping offered protection. Through the chaos, he saw Hayes standing his ground, face contorted with rage and disbelief. Then a large section of ceiling gave way, and Hayes disappeared beneath a cascade of rock and earth. When the rumbling subsided, the tunnel between them and the guardian chamber was partially collapsed. Some men had fled, others were injured. Of Hayes himself, there was no sign beneath the rubble. Help me, Mason said to Nayland, moving toward the fallen rocks. He's buried under there. Why help man who would destroy everything? Nayland asked, though she was already following him. Because we're not like him, Mason replied simply. Together with two soldiers, they uncovered Hayes, bloodied but alive. His leg was broken, and blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. As they prepared to leave the Silver River chamber, Nayland knelt briefly beside the flowing silver waters, murmuring words in Apache that Mason couldn't understand. What did you say? He asked when she rejoined him. Thanked ancestors. Thanked Kami's father and Tohoma's grandfather, who died protecting land from men like Hayes. She touched the eagle tattoo on her shoulder. Told them their sacrifice not forgotten. Mason realized then how interconnected their journey had been, how Maka's loss of his brother, Kami's father's death, and Tohoma's interrupted path as a medicine man were all threads in the same tapestry that included Raven Ridge and his own guilt. The Silver River wasn't just Nayland's heritage to protect. It represented something vital to all who had suffered under the expansion that men like Hayes championed. When we return, he said quietly, we should ask Maka to hold a ceremony for all those who couldn't be here to see this moment. Nayland nodded, a rare smile touching her lips. This is why guardians let you pass, Mason Caldwell. You begin to understand. Why? Hayes rasped. Why did you save me? Because there's been enough death, Mason said, and because you need to see what you almost destroyed. With Nayland's agreement, they half-carried Hayes toward the Silver River chamber. The Guardians allowed them to pass without challenge this time, perhaps recognizing that Hayes no longer posed a threat. When they emerged into the vast chamber, Hayes went completely still in their grasp. My God, he whispered, his voice stripped of pretense. It's magnificent. They lowered him to a sitting position near the bank. Hayes winced as his broken leg touched the ground, but his eyes never left the flowing silver stream. This is what you would have destroyed, Nayland said softly. This is what my people protect. Hayes didn't respond immediately. For several long minutes, he simply stared at the river, his expression shifting from awe to calculation and back again. Mason could almost see the battle happening behind the senator's eyes. The politician weighing the profit potential against the beauty before him, the businessman calculating worth against risk, the man confronting something beyond his understanding. You know, Hayes finally said, his voice low, I've spent my entire life acquiring things. Land, power, influence. He gestured at his fine clothes, now torn and bloodied, the trappings of success. He dipped his fingers cautiously into the silvery water, then drew them back as if shocked. But this isn't something that can be owned, is it? Nalin shook her head. Silver River owns itself, belongs to earth, to spirits, not to men. Hayes studied his wet fingertips, which seemed to shimmer slightly in the ethereal light. I was in the war, you know, saw men die for causes they believed in. He looked up at Mason. I always thought them fools, but I think I understand now. Some things are worth more than profit. His hand trembled slightly as he wiped it dry on his jacket. I didn't understand, he continued, his voice growing steadier. I was told it was just an unusually pure silver deposit that could revolutionize our weapons manufacturing. Not this. He gestured weakly at the chamber around them. Not something divine. The arrogance that had defined him was cracking, like ice on a spring river, revealing something underneath. Not goodness necessarily, but perhaps wisdom. I've spent decades fighting nature, bending it to my will, Hayes murmured, almost to himself. Perhaps it's time I learned to work with it instead. Mason exchanged a glance with Nayland. Hayes's transformation seemed genuine, but they had learned to be cautious with white men's promises. What happens now? Hayes asked after a moment, his politician's mind already calculating the next move. You kill me? Leave me here? Mason shook his head. We take you back to your men. You get medical attention. And then you have a choice to make. A choice? There was wariness in the senator's voice. You can continue with your plans, bring more men, try again to take what isn't yours, Mason said evenly. Or you can use your influence to protect this place. Hayes looked back at the Silver River, his expression thoughtful. You realize what you're asking? The government has already committed resources. There are contracts, expectations, powerful men waiting for results. More powerful than what you just witnessed? Nalin asked quietly. Hayes's hand unconsciously moved to the amulet at his throat, a political good luck charm he'd carried for decades. No, he admitted. I suppose not. He was silent for a long moment, and Mason could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, not just of personal survival, but of legacy. Hayes was no longer a young man. His time for building wealth was passing. His time for building memory was at hand. I've been many things in my life, Caldwell, Hayes said finally. Not all of them honorable, but I've never been a fool. He looked again at the Silver River. Only a fool would try to claim this. A memory seemed to cross his face. My grandfather was a preacher, he said unexpectedly, believed in sacred places. Told me once that when you find yourself standing on holy ground, you take off your shoes, not stake a claim. He gestured to his injured leg. Seems I've been reminded of that lesson rather forcefully. And if you choose to ignore it, Mason pressed, if you decide later that profit outweighs reverence, then the guardians will be waiting, Nayland said simply, and next time perhaps they not so merciful. As if in response, a tremor passed through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable. The silvery waters rippled, and somewhere in the distance, a deep rumble echoed through the cave. Hayes paled further, then gave a decisive nod. I understand, he said quietly. I'll do what I can to protect it. Then, with a politician's instinct for finding advantage even in defeat, he added, perhaps this is a better legacy than silver mines. Hayes Wilderness Preserve has a certain ring to it, wouldn't you say? Whether from genuine conversion, self-preservation, or simple political calculation, Mason couldn't fully tell. But as they helped Hayes back through the tunnel to his waiting men, he sensed that something had fundamentally changed in the senator. The man who emerged from the Silver River chamber was not the same one who had entered the cave. As Hayes was carried away, he called Mason over one last time. This doesn't change everything between us, Caldwell, he said quietly. There will still be questions about Blackwood's death, but I give you my word, the Silver River will remain untouched. I'll see to it. personally. In the days that followed, they learned that Hayes had kept his word. Orders came from Washington declaring the entire Sierra Blanca region a protected reservation, off limits to mining or development. The Silver River would remain a secret, known only to those deemed worthy by its guardians. 1 year later, Mason stood on the steps of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., watching as President Grant signed the Sierra Blanca Protection Act into law. The act permanently protected not only the Silver River site, but a vast swath of surrounding territory, placing it under the joint stewardship of the federal government and a council of tribal representatives. Senator Hayes had used his considerable influence to shepherd the legislation through Congress. His near-death experience in the cave had transformed him from exploiter to protector. The charges against Mason for Blackwood's death had been quietly dropped, classified as self-defense based on testimony from Lieutenant Wallace. Hayes approached Mason leaning heavily on a cane, a permanent reminder of his encounter with the Guardians. "It's done," the senator said, offering his hand. "The river is safe, as promised." Mason shook the offered hand. "Thank you, Senator." Hayes glanced around. "And your Apache friend, where is she now?" "With the Mescalero," Mason replied, "teaching their children the old Tomies, the stories, the sayings." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "I still dream about it sometimes. The Silver River. I've never seen anything so beautiful." "Few have," Mason acknowledged, "and few ever will." "As it should be, Basim," Hayes said with surprising sincerity. Mason left Washington that same day, eager to return to the West. For the first time in a decade, he found himself facing a future without the weight of the past dragging at his heels. 3 weeks later, his journey brought him back to the Mescalero camp. Maka greeted him like an old friend. "You return with truth, as promised," the headman said with satisfaction. "Stories reach us even here. Mountains protected now." Maka studied Mason with shrewd eyes. "But journey not over for you, I think." "No," Mason agreed. "I'm still figuring out where I belong now." The old man smiled knowingly. "She is at Sacred Pool. Go. She waits." Mason found Nayland at a small spring on the edge of the camp, teaching children how to weave baskets. She looked up as he approached, and her smile transformed her face. "You came back," she said simply. "I said I would. Many men say many things. I'm not many men." She smiled again, the expression warming her usually solemn features. "No, you are Mason Caldwell, protector of Silver River, friend to Apache people." She stepped closer. "Friend to Nayland." There was a question in her eyes that Mason had been contemplating during the long journey back from Washington. "More than friend, I hope," he said softly. "If you'll have me." Nayland studied him for a long moment, then touched his face. "I thought white man with Apache woman not possible." "We've seen impossible things together," Mason replied. "Maybe we're just one more impossible thing in a world full of wonders." She laughed then, a sound so rare that Mason felt privileged to hear it. "You speak pretty words now, Mason Caldwell." "Not just words," he assured her, taking her hand in his. "What I want is to be where you are." 2 days later, they stood together on a ridge overlooking Sierra Blanca. The evening sun painted the mountains gold, the sky deepening to indigo. "What will we do now?" Mason asked, his arm around Nayland's shoulders. "Many things," she replied thoughtfully. "Teach children old ways, help Mescalero protect land, maybe find other survivors of Eagle Clan." "And us?" he pressed gently. "What about us?" Nayland turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunset. "Us is simpler. Us is together." She smiled, touching the amulet Maka had given him. "Two paths becoming one path." As if in response, a large bird launched from a nearby pine. An eagle, its silhouette unmistakable against the darkening sky. "Eagle," Nayland whispered. "Sign of new beginning." Mason watched the magnificent birds soar higher and felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey that had begun with a single act of mercy in a snow-covered clearing had led him here, to this woman, to a future he could never have imagined. As darkness settled, Nayland began to sing softly, the song of the eagle, but with subtle differences. "New words?" he asked when she finished. "Old song, new verse," she explained. "Song of eagle finding mate, building nest after long winter." She looked up at him. "Song of coming home." Home. The word resonated within Mason, filling empty spaces he had carried for too long. Not a place, but a feeling. Not a building, but a belonging. Teach me, he said. And as the first stars emerged, Nayland taught Mason the new verse of the ancient song, a melody of healing, of hope, of two souls finding in each other what they had thought forever lost.